Hello again out there in internet land. I am the Jazz and Blues audiophile with you once again because it's time to talk about jazz. And particularly, it's time to talk about a historical jazz concert. The first great recorded historical jazz concert. And I'm talking, of course, of the famous January 16, 1938, Benny Goodman and his orchestra live at Carnegie Hall in New York City. Now, Carnegie Hall, as you know, was a sacrosanct place where only classical musicians would perform, and it was the high and mighty, the high society that would pay the big prices to go and listen to classical music there. It was a shrine of classical music, and it was not open to jazz at all, but Benny Goodman's agent back in 1937 got the idea of trying to get Benny Goodman in there and getting the first jazz concert, a jazz swing band in there to perform one of the first concerts for listening only. Because, of course, Carnegie Hall is a place where you go and you sit and you listen to the musical performance in front of you. Now, Benny was a little bit worried about this because he had some misgivings because he says, when I play, and when he played, it was in hotels, basically, in ballrooms where people could dance to his music. And of course, the jazz of the time was the popular music of the time, and it was also a dancing music. It was music that people danced to. They went out for a nice evening with a nice meal, and afterwards the band was there and was playing, and you could dance and just have a very memorable, nice evening. But there was, of course, no dancing at Carnegie Hall, which was basically a listening experience. It had to be. And that worried Benny, of course, a little bit in the beginning, so he wasn't too sure. But then when he saw how well the tickets sold, they were sold out weeks ahead of time. The whole place was sold. They said Carnegie Hall holds 2,700 seats or something like that, close to that number. And they were all sold out. And Benny's worries dissipated, and he brought his band in there to practice quite a lot because Benny was, he was a perfectionist. He liked his band to sound a certain way and to be a well-oiled, well-tuned swing machine. And so he brought his band in there. They practiced a lot, and they got ready for that fateful night of January 16. And they went on and played. And so it was historical because this was the first time, of course, that jazz entered Carnegie Hall. And it was also historical because Benny brought along with him, of course, his trio and quartet, which comprised two great black musicians of jazz, the great Teddy Wilson on piano and the great Lionel Hampton on vibraphone. And he brought them along, and they joined in the performances, the trio and quartet performances. And he also got a bunch of special guests to perform on a jam of Honeysuckle Rose, which was to be a jam session, the illustration of a jam session, because Benny Goodman was trying to do a little bit of education at the same time. He was trying to educate the people about jazz, which was still 1938. Jazz was a relatively new music, a new art form. It had been born around the beginning of the century, around 1900. And it was still a very young music, and it still is today, even in 2019. We can consider it's a fairly young music. But back then it was even younger. So it was maybe in his adolescence back then, And he brought in a bunch of special guests in order to play a demonstration of what a jam session would be among jazz musicians. And they decided to jam on Honeysuckle Rose, which is playing in the background right now. And he also did a little bit of history of jazz. He did a part of the concert where he played some traditional New Orleans type jazz. And he played this jam session of Honeysuckle Rose also. And for that session, for that particular piece, he brought in, listen to the musicians he brought in, all great legendary black jazz musicians. He brought in Count Basie, he brought in Johnny Hodges, Harry Carney, Cootie Williams, Freddie Green, Walter Page, Lester Young, Buck Clayton. I mean, these are people from the Duke Ellington and Count Basie orchestras, and he got them in there to participate on this recording of Honeysuckle Rose at Carnegie Hall. He also had Bobby Hackett on there as a special guest. this is just fantastic, and they're all, most of them except for Bobby Hackett, they're all black musicians. So Benny was even going further and saying, hey, I don't care about the racial barrier. The hell with the racial barrier. The heck with that crap. These are fine musicians, and I'm going to present them to you and give you an opportunity to listen to them in a pure concert form. And it was magnificent. We know that the results now, because of course this recording, this performance was being recorded. Benny did not know it at the time, did not have a faint idea it was being recorded from one single mic that was hanging over the orchestra. Because Carnegie Hall, what you got to know is a lot of broadcasts were being done from Carnegie Hall live over the radio back in the day of classical concerts. And so they had that microphone always there for the radio, and that was transmitting the sound to a radio station. And at the time, a radio station decided to record the Benny Goodman performance. They recorded it on acetate discs, and there was another radio station that was receiving the concert also, and was recording it on aluminum masters also. And the interesting thing is that ever since that original publication of this recording back in 1950, when Benny Goodman found it again in his closet, he had put away his copy, it was handed a copy after the concert, he put it away in his closet in his apartment back in 1938, forgot about it, and found it again in 1950, gave it to Columbia Records, under which he was under contract with at the time, and they published it for the first time on a 33.5 long-playing vinyl record, and it became a bestseller. It was the first long-playing record that sold over 1 million copies. It was a 2-record set of the famous 1938 concert. And this is how we got to know and hear the music was performed on that night. For all of us that weren't, I wasn't even born back then, and I couldn't have been there, but I would have loved to be there and listen to this great, great musical performance, because the jazz that is performed in this recording on that night, on that concert, man, this is some real fine playing. I mean, all the musicians are playing their hearts out. You listen to Harry James, all the regular musicians in the band are really playing well. Harry James is blowing his brains out on his trumpet. I mean, Gene Krupa is just drumming his way just like crazy. And all the musicians just perform fantastically, including Jess Stacy, which is their regular pianist at the time, who improvises wonderfully on Sing, Sing, Sing. And it's become that particular piano solo has become a stuff of classic and a stuff of legend. You know, they speak about it even today, that he decided to go out and improvise on his own during that thing, and with the approbation of Benny, of course, and it was just wonderful playing. And so this thing was recorded and was issued out. Now, of course, originally in 1950, if you want sound quality, we have to talk about sound quality, because we're talking about a very old recording. We're talking about days where tape was not, well, it was existing. It existed, tape existed, but it was not perfected to the point where we were recording on tape yet. We had to wait for the 40s for that. But in 1938, we were still recording on 78s, whether they were made out of acetate or whether we were recording on aluminum masters that we were going to stamp some copies later. It was still that kind of recording that was being done. So the first issue on LP, the one that was done in 1950, and subsequently in the 50s, there was several reissues of the whole concert. I got my hands on a 1955 Philips Records copy, and I can tell you, in my opinion, that is the best sounding version out there that was ever put out. If you can get your hands on an old copy like that, because we're talking 1955, this one, and it was reissued several times. I think up until the early 60s it was issued on Philips Records. I think this is a European issue, but it sounds really, really, really good. I mean, there seems to be more mid-range in the recording on the instruments. You hear the tone is just generally better, the general tone. And they didn't do like on this reissue where they filtered out all the background noise and muffled the sound, basically. And they filtered out a lot of the high frequencies and just muffled the whole sound. And this reissue by Columbia Records is the pits. It's really not the best. It's actually, it was reissued in this form on LPs during the 70s and early 80s many times. It's not the full concert. If you have this particular edition, it's not the full concert. There's 2 tracks missing from it. 2 big band performances of Sometimes I'm Happy and If Dreams Come True. These 2 tracks are not on this edition, but they are on the complete edition that was reissued back in 1999. Now this one is the complete reissue, along with Benny Goodman introducing some of the tracks, along with the applause that was recorded, and including those 2 pieces, Sometimes I'm Happy and If Dreams Come True. They're on that one, and they were not included in the original issue, I believe, because they figured the sound take was not quite as good as the other pieces. It's true that the sound take is a little bit less well done compared to the other tracks, but nevertheless, hey, it's still very much listenable. I think we could very much listen to that and appreciate those 2 numbers anyway. And they're on the complete issue of 1999, which is the issue that I recommend if you can't get your hands on that old LP version. I'm talking from the 50s, which is probably hard to find, although you could probably find it on the internet, on an Amazon or something. You can get the 1999 issue, which is not this one. This one dates from the end of the 80s. But you can get the 1999 issue, the complete issue of the 1988 concert, and in very, very good sounding. That's the best sounding. It was done from the Aluminum Masters, I believe, this one. And so it's the best sounding CD issue that you will find if you're looking to get a good copy of that today. Because this issue here, I have to say, this one here, as I said, they filtered out all the sound, all the background noise. They got rid of a whole bunch of frequencies. They muffled the sound, and they had the gall in this issue to say on the top, it says here, digitally remastered from the original analog tapes. Digitally remastered, my foot. This was not remastered in any way, shape, or form. It sounds exactly like the vinyl copy I used to have. It's just a transfer, as is, of the same mastering that was done for the vinyl reissue of the 70s with all that muffled, those muffled frequencies and that overall muffled sound that you get. If you can't get any other copy, hey, it's better than nothing. But let me tell you something, there are better issues out there. And that better issue being on CD, being that 1999 issue on Columbia. This time again, they redid it, and this time they got it right. So congratulations, Columbia Records. You took the music seriously, and you did a better reissue this time. And that's the one I recommend, that reissue. If not, it's been also reissued in 2006 on a British label. Which also did a fine job of remastering this old stuff. I think they excluded all the applause though, and there's no comments by Benny Goodman included on this. There's just all the numbers, but they're all there, including the 2 numbers that I mentioned. And that's a fine reissue. It's a British reissue. And there's also an issue of this. There's several. I don't know all of them. I'm not aware of all of them, but one of them was a German reissue, I believe. It's on MCPS Records. I don't know if that rings a bell. It says here on the CD that it's from Hamburg. This is a download of this. I purchased it as a download from an original CD edition. The company is in Hamburg. I believe that's Germany. Correct me if I'm wrong. And on this 2 CD reissue, they reissued part of the 1938 Carnegie Hall concert, not all of it, but part of it. And then they've got a 1939 performance, which I just became aware of, that was also recorded at Carnegie Hall by Benny Goodman and his orchestra on October 6, 1939. So the following year after the 1938 date. And I was not aware that he was back in there for another concert. I don't know if this was just him performing again, or if he was part of a larger group of jazz men performing in 1939, because I know that after he broke the ground for Carnegie Hall to admit jazz into its hall, well, of course, there were several jazz concert that would follow at Carnegie Hall in 1939, 1940, in the 40s in general, and then on to the 50s and up to today. Now Carnegie Hall, of course, will host jazz with no problem now. But in 1939 he was back on October 6th, and he performs these tracks. They're included on this German CD, as I say, along with the rest that are Carnegie traditional 1938 recordings. But he performs on August 6, 1939. Here's what he performs. He performs Don't Be That Way, Sunrise Serenade, which is normally associated with the Glenn Miller Orchestra. Think What You Do Is the Way That You Do It, Back Goes to Town, 1 O'Clock Jump, The Sheik of Araby, Flying Home, and Stardust. And now the interesting thing is that he's got on this, his band personnel is of course himself at the clarinet. He's got Jimmy Maxwell, Ziggy Elman, Johnny Martell on trumpets, Red Ballard, Vernon Brown, Ted Wesley on trombones, Toots Mondello, Buff Estes on alto sax, Bus Bussy, Jerry Jerome on tenor sax. He's got Fletcher Anderson, of all people, at the piano, Arnold Covey on guitar, Art Bernstein's on bass, and Lionel Hampton is taking care of the drums for the big band. Now, he performs the Sheik of Araby in trio format with Fletcher Anderson on piano and Lionel Hampton at the drums. How's that? That's pretty special. He performs Flying Home and Stardust with Charlie Christian. He's got Charlie Christian playing the guitar. He's got Fletcher Anderson on piano, Lionel Hampton on vibes, Nick Fatul's on drums, and Art Bernstein's on bass. So he's got a sextet here playing with him, playing Flying Home and Stardust. And then he finishes with Sing, Sing, Sing with a Swing with the full big band with Lionel Hampton playing the drums. So I'm intrigued about this. What was he doing back in Carnegie Hall so early, back in 1939? And what context was this recording done? Was it part of a larger jazz concert, a jazz festival going on at Carnegie Hall? I don't know. I was intrigued to discover this. I just discovered this recently. Of course, it's great stuff, great performances, sounds great. The sound recording is not all that great, but the performances are absolutely magnificent, as usual with Benny Goodman. You know, I don't think Benny ever recorded anything really, really bad, because he was just a very professional, consummate musician, just a really, really fine performer, just a fine all-around musician. And he always had fine people playing with him. We could say, I guess we could say he knew how to pick them. You know, Benny, he really knew how to pick them. Every time he went on tour with a different big band in the following years, whether it was the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, he always had some great musicians playing with him. And we must not forget that on top of this 1938 recording and this 1939 recording at Carnegie Hall, there was another very famous recording done at Carnegie Hall in 1978. It was the 40th anniversary of the Carnegie Hall 1938 concert, and Benny brought his big band and some small groups again to Carnegie Hall in 78, and that was recorded and also issued on a 2 LP vinyl record set. And it's also a fine performance of Benny and his then orchestra they assembled for the occasion, 1978, which he has great musicians playing with him again, and he's got some of the classics coming back with him, like he's got Martha Tilton singing with him again, he's got Lionel Hampton, and a number of other musicians with him on that one. But that one's also to be noted, that 1978 Carnegie Hall performance. Might be a little bit harder to find in the 1938 one, which is very famous because of its historical nature. But the 1978 performance is also very, very good. Excellent performance by Goodman. I don't think Goodman could play bad. I've never heard a bad recording of Benny. I've never heard him badly accompanied by other musicians. He's always had fine musicians surrounding him. And when you listen to Goodman, you're listening to top-class jazz and top-class musicians usually. These were really, 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 they were great, great artists. And they should be recognized as such. Great musicians of the 20th century. So anyway, that was my little rant for today. That was my suggestion. If you don't know about this historical, wonderful, fantastic, fantabulous recording, Benny Goodman and his orchestra, January 16, 1938 in Carnegie Hall, would never be the same after this. then get your hands on one of the copies, whatever copy you can get your hands on, even if it's this one, which is not the best sounding, but better than nothing. But if you can, get yourself the good one, the reissue of 1999 on CD by Columbia again, and get to listen to some really great swinging, romping, moving jazz like only that era could produce. So until then, until next time, I'm the Jazz and Blues audiophile. Don't forget to subscribe. Hit the subscribe button. And if you have any information that you can share with me about that 1939 date where he was back at Carnegie Hall, which really intrigues me because that's mysterious to me. I don't know what he was doing there so soon. Then feel free to comment in the comments section below. And go ahead and I'll probably answer you if you share. So, till next time, remember what I always say. Jazz on. Go ahead, listen to some good jazz music, make you feel better. So until next time, bye-bye.